Okay, so he had more than 20 years on the force with not a mark against him. Before last year, a sergeant with the St. Louis County Police had only ever been written up for a disciplinary infraction once in his entire career. And that was because he had once forgotten his badge. When he showed up for work, he had misplaced his badge, and so he got in trouble for that. That had been the only time he'd been written up or had any mark against him. More than 20 years on the force. But then, last year, in quick succession, that same sergeant got reprimanded and dinged and punished over and over and over again. His lieutenant wrote him up for failure to supervise, saying he should have gone to the scene of an incident to supervise officers who were under his command. A few weeks later, the same sergeant was written up again, this time for allegedly entering incorrect codes on some payroll documents. Then they sprung an impromptu drug test on him with no warning, telling him he was being drug tested that very day, had to take it within 2 hours. Then they revoked his access to the police-issue vehicle that he'd been given to be his take-home car on the police force. When they revoked his take-home car, 2 other sergeants from the police department showed up at his house to take the car away from him, and he says, to stand over him with their hands on their pistols as they watched him clean the vehicle out with his hands. Then after that, the county decided that this sergeant should be transferred away from the district where he worked, which was right near to where he lived. They moved him to a district farther away from where he lived with no explanation. And that transfer away from his home district, that, the sergeant says, was the last straw. And he filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission saying the reason he believed he was suddenly being treated this way after 20 spotless years on the force was because he was a whistleblower. Because he was the whistleblower who had previously only been known by the name Lone Wolf. For months, someone signing the name Lone Wolf had written a series of anonymous letters to the St. Louis County Police Chief. The letters started in December 2012, and they said that a powerful and well-connected lieutenant in that police department had been directing uniformed St. Louis County police officers that they should specifically arrest black people, that they should specifically target black people for arrest in specific shopping areas in southern St. Louis County. Lone Wolf, this whistleblower, said that this lieutenant would make these claims out in the open at roll call. With the other officers present, the lieutenant would say things like, quote, let's have a black day. Let's today stop everybody with a tan. Let's stop everybody black at the mall. Quote, let's make the jail cells more colorful. According to Lone Wolf, this whistleblower, among the uniformed officers who were being told this by their lieutenant at the start of their shifts at roll call, there were some black officers. Lone Wolf says the lieutenant dealt with that awkwardness by telling those black officers, don't worry, I don't mean you guys, you're the good ones. Lone Wolf, the sergeant who was the whistleblower, later told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that he had waited months before summoning the courage to write those anonymous letters about the behavior of his lieutenant, because, he said, this lieutenant had often bragged about being really well connected, about knowing all the top commanders in the department. The whistleblower told the paper, quote, I had no intention to take the police department down. But these things had to be stopped. When a black person can't go shopping at a mall, it's wrong. This isn't 50 years ago. Both the sergeant who was the whistleblower and the lieutenant who he was whistleblowing against, incidentally, were both white men. The allegations by the whistleblower triggered an internal review in St. Louis County. The lieutenant denied all the allegations, but 2 things happened in the course of that review. First thing, Lone Wolf, the whistleblower, when he came forward and talked to internal affairs, so inside the police department, they knew who had previously been anonymous. They knew who had been the whistleblower. That, he said, is when this chain of retaliation started against him. Losing his take-home car, getting drug tested, getting transferred far away from his house, getting those demerits essentially in his personnel file, all the rest of it. He says that started as soon as he identified himself to internal affairs. Internal retaliation for blowing the whistle on another cop. But the investigation did happen, though. And that investigation did give other officers on the force a chance to corroborate these allegations. And sure enough, by the time the county police chief fired that lieutenant in St. Louis County, It was because that police chief, through the internal affairs investigation, was able to find not one, not two, but at least 9 other officers who said, yeah, that stuff that the guy was alleging, that actually did happen. The letter from the county police chief to the lieutenant ultimately firing him, that letter was leaked to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. It said in part, quote, "You were heard by at least 9 officers on multiple occasions directing enforcement actions on persons with black, tan, or colored skin without any reference to probable cause." So that police lieutenant in St. Louis County last year was fired for what was described as his racial remarks. He did lose his job. Apparently, that came at great cost to the man who blew the whistle on his racist behavior. After the lieutenant was fired, the police chief in St. Louis County also announced that he would also ask for new data about race and policing in St. Louis County. He said he would contact a team of researchers at UCLA in California to come in and study the St. Louis County arrest data to ensure that racial profiling wasn't occurring, to ensure basically that police officers under this lieutenant's command weren't actually following his instructions to go fill up the jail cells that day with black people. It's interesting, though, getting more data about that sort of thing, getting more data about the risk that black people and white people are being policed differently. I mean, it never seems like a bad idea to have more information about something like that. But Missouri, interestingly, already does have a ton of information on that subject publicly available if anybody cares to look. It's no secret. And there's an interesting reason why. In the year 2000, the Missouri legislature had a particularly bad year. It was described as a caustic legislative session in 2000 in the great state of Missouri. But one of the things they did pass by overwhelming margins in both the House and the Senate that year in Missouri was a bill about racial profiling, a bill specifically to collect data on race and policing. In August 2000, the then Democratic Governor Mel Carnahan and the then Attorney General, who's now the Democratic Governor of Missouri, Jay Nixon, they were both personally on hand for the public signing of this Missouri bill that, A, banned racial profiling by police in Missouri, but B, it also required that every police officer in the state would have to record information about the race of the person they were stopping every time they made a traffic stop. They have to do that in the state of Missouri by law since the year 2000. Every police department and every police officer in the state. It's mandatory reporting. And so there's this incredible data, incredible arrest by arrest data made publicly available on the website of the Missouri Attorney General's office every year. And it's well laid out. You just click on the county, click on the town within the county, click on it year by year, and it tells you exactly what proportion of people stopped in every little town across the state are black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, or other. And so in, say, the town of Ferguson, Missouri, which is in St. Louis County, you can get very specific data for each of the last 14 years about your racial likelihood of getting stopped by police for some reason in that particular town. And in that data, you can see over time remarkable consistency for the racial ratio of how people who live in that town are policed. I mean, this is official data from the state of Missouri. It's not some outside survey. It's not something that somebody comes in and does once every 6 years and hopes it's a snapshot. It's year by year by year, arrest after arrest after arrest, every town in the state by law. And it comes up with an incredibly comprehensive and detailed racial disparity index for policing, town by town. This is basically what they found for Ferguson. If there was no racial inflection at all to the rate at which people got stopped, if a racial group's proportion of the population was exactly the same as the proportion of stops by the police for that group, then that ratio would be 1.0. That would be totally neutral. So you see that marked with a gray line there. Here's what that ratio actually is for black people in Ferguson. See how much above 1.0 it is? That's how much more likely black people are to get stopped by police relative to their share of the population in Ferguson, Missouri. This is what it is for white people. Oh, look how far below that line it is. That's how much less likely you are to get stopped by police in Ferguson relative to white people's share of the population in that town. If you want to look at it another way, the most recent data for 2013, black people made up 67% of the population in Ferguson, but they made up 86% of the traffic stops. And that is a big disparity, just as a snapshot in time for a single year in a single town. But what is actually more amazing is how long it has consistently been like that in that town.